Singapore's first Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew died in the early hours of March 23rd. Credited with transforming the country into a thriving first world state, Mr. Lee continued to influence government policy long after his retirement in 1990. I'm Leila Milana Allen, and joining me on the line from Singapore is our Banyan columnist Simon Long. So Simon, how have Singaporeans reacted to the news of Mr. Lee's death?
Well, of course, it can hardly have come as a surprise. He was 91, he'd been in intensive care for over 6 weeks. But it's still a big event here. He is such a huge figure in the country's history. So what has happened is that there is a week of national mourning. The body is at the moment in here, the Istana, the presidential palace, which also used to be his office when he was Prime Minister and later on in the cabinet. People are paying their respects here, signing condolence books. Then the body will be lying in state at Parliament for people to go and view, and there will be a state funeral on Sunday, 1 week after his death.
So what will his legacy be?
As he himself said, Singapore itself is his legacy. Very prosperous, one of the richest countries in the world now, and he built this. One of his sayings was, people look at Singapore and they keep on saying how well everything works. And I look at it and I think, I made that happen. I made it work.
And what exactly was Mr. Lee's role in the transformation of Singapore?
Well, he was its Prime Minister until 1990, so he led it through independence, through its birth as an independent nation in 1965, and he stayed in the cabinet until 2011 as still very much an influential senior advisory figure. So he was a huge figure. It's not too much to say that the Singapore story, which is what he called his autobiography, was not a boast. Singapore is very much his creation, and even his critics would concede that he has played a huge role in making it what it is.
Simon, can you tell me a little bit about the particular traits that defined Mr. Lee's leadership style?
Mr. Lee prided himself above all on his pragmatism, on doing what he thought was best, taking no nonsense, not following any particular ideology, just doing what was right for Singapore. And of course, he was always convinced that he was right. Alongside his pragmatism went a certain arrogance and an authoritarian streak, so that he was convinced he knew best and that Singaporeans would have to follow him and the very able team he assembled behind him. So alongside the enormous praise for his economic policies and the success and prosperity that's brought Singapore, there's also always been criticism of the way he curtailed some civil liberties here.
So Simon, what can future Singaporean leaders and world leaders learn from Mr. Lee?
I think the main lesson he has for other politicians is that of the benefits of pragmatism and flexibility, of not being hidebound by dogma or ideology, but of doing what works and abandoning policies that don't work, however hard one has pushed them in the past. I think the danger in his legacy is that other countries, particularly China in this region, look at Singapore and see its success as a result of his authoritarian streak, of the restrictions he imposed on the opposition here, of the way civil liberties were somewhat curtailed, because they, it seems to me, were not at all central to his main success, which was that of economic development by following pragmatic, unideological policies.
Thanks, Simon. That was Simon Long, our Banyan columnist, on the line from Singapore. In London, this is The Economist.
The Economist.